You may know North Star Games from their other titles such as Telestrations or Wits and Wagers, which fall into more of a party game genre. However, 2 years ago they came out with Evolution, which is a strategic card game about getting your own species to survive in a constantly adapting and evolving ecosystem of other species played by other players. Today, we're going to talk about Flight, which is the first expansion for Evolution, and look into its main new mechanic, which is the trait of Flight, which introduces a number of different abilities for species. Additionally, some other event cards that are introduced, and some new traits. So we're going to take a look at how this expansion works with the base game, and then go over some final thoughts on if this is a good expansion or not. Taking a look inside of the Flight expansion for Evolution, we find 2 main things: the new Flight traits and their corresponding species boards, and a stack of new traits, which both mesh well with existing strategies without the avian species, as well as new trait cards, which work very well with Flight-enabled species. So now we're going to take a look specifically at what this Flight mechanic does and how it integrates with the game. So in the normal game, in the base game of Evolution, if a player wanted to add a species, they would discard 1 card to then add 1 new species board in front of their player. And that player could play traits as they wanted normally during the game. The species starts at both 1 population and 1 body size. Now, instead of discarding 1 card with Flight, player can instead discard 2 cards to add a species in front of them that has both a new different kind of species board as well as a trait right off the bat, and that trait is Flight. Now, avian species, they only have a body size of up to 3. They can't be that big. And you'll also notice that they have 3 upkeep food slots. Now, when an avian species feeds, they must fill this body size first before they start taking population. This introduces an overhead and upkeep cost to the species. However, when the feeding phase starts and these cards are flipped over, which add food to the watering hole, the cliff gets food equal to the number of players. So in this case, in a 2-player game, you would get 2 food. Now, only avian species can feed from the cliff. Avian species can also still feed from the watering hole if they would like, but they have exclusive access to the cliff, which does give them a significant advantage. But again, if everyone decides to make avian species, then that cliff becomes a lot less interesting. All the other mechanics regarding body size for carnivores, that all stays the same for avian species. But that's the base for avian species. Now let's talk a little bit about the specific new trait cards that are introduced to Flight. Alright, so in addition to the new Flight trait card that is introduced in the Flight expansion, there are 4 new trait cards that are shuffled into the main trait deck. Now these trait cards, some of them only impact avian species, but some of them also impact ground species as well. So the first pair are Camouflage and Good Eyesight. Camouflage is going to be similar to Climbing from the base game, in that only a carnivore with good eyesight can attack a species with camouflage. And good eyesight allows attacking camouflage, but it also impacts non-carnivores in that they can take 2 food from the watering hole when food cards are revealed. Now additionally, there are some Flight-specific cards, such as Brood Parasite. Brood Parasite is going to give an interesting effect before food cards are revealed. If the player has more than 1 avian species, this particular species can take 1 plant or meat food and gain 1 population. Then the other new trait card is Nesting, which, whenever a population increases for this species, if it's a land species, it gets to take 1 food, and if it's an avian species, it gets to take 2 food. So with the 5 new trait cards, that introduces some variants to strategies going forward. Additionally, Flight introduces event cards. So both of these event cards are shuffled, well, there's a number of them that get shuffled into the trait deck. And each of them can be played during the play cards phase after traits have been revealed. Now, Seed Dispersal increases the food in the watering hole based on the number of avian species, and Dive Bomb allows for a carnivore to make an attack before anyone else gets to go, or for a non-carnivore, it allows them to take food from the food bank. So that's about it for the components and the new mechanics introduced in Flight. You have the Flight trait and these handful of new traits to add variety to your game. So if you went back and read my original review of Evolution, you would know that I find this game very polarizing. There's a lot of people that really enjoy it, but there's a lot of people that really don't enjoy it. And I think that largely stems from the direct conflict for resources, that direct conflict for food, or the conflict from carnivores. Flight doesn't necessarily fix any of those problems, but it definitely adds more in terms of traits and more avenues for survival. So people who didn't like the original base game of Evolution aren't really going to find anything new or enjoyable in Flight, but those people that do like Evolution, this is an excellent expansion for the game. It adds a lot more traits, a lot more avenues for success, for differentiation. It's one of the big ways to... one of the big strategies in the game to win is to differentiate yourself from other species. And Flight definitely adds those avenues. It also increases the variation with the event cards, which do make it a very interesting, different type of gameplay from Evolution. But again, it doesn't change anything greatly or fix any of the problems a lot of people had with the base game. So if you like Evolution, I highly recommend Flight. If you weren't really a fan of the base game, this isn't going to do much for you. So keep your eyes out for the next expansion that's coming up, Climate, which will change the game even more in terms of how the ecosystem works. But that's a good look at Evolution Flight.